Welcome to the midweek edition of LegalAF with your co-hosts Michael Popok and Karen Friedman Agnifilo. And today on a special edition, we're joined by a very amazing guest, one that I've wanted to get on the show for a long time, Anthony Davis, who most people know as the host of the 5 Minute News and the Weekend Show. He's a British broadcaster, journalist with more than 20 years of experience, a radio broadcaster for the BBC in the past. And in 2017, he relocated to the US, residing in Los Angeles, where he looked around and decided there was a lack of nonpartisan and world news coverage. And he decided to fill that gap with his partners. And they came up with 5 Minute News, which is now on the Meidas Media Network. I've been on the show and I've been chomping at the bit to get Anthony on our show, Karen, so that we can get a view to what's happening on Jan6 and the Jan6 hearings from somebody who didn't grow up here, who learned about our system in different ways than you and I did, and has that unique perspective to bring to this. So Anthony, welcome to LegalAF.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I do think perspective is important. And I also think that relocating is important. And I feel like if we get the chance in our lives to travel, then that's one thing. But to actually stop for, more than 6 months, it took me about 6 months to kind of acclimatize to living in the US. And I really recommend it. If you've got the opportunity, just go somewhere else.
And were you, right from the get-go, were you focused on our political system, our political scheme as part of your world news coverage?
Yeah, because when I was on the radio for years in London, and when you start out on the radio, they put you on at night. So I used to go on at midnight, and I would be on just doing a talk show till 5 o'clock in the morning. And invariably, because of the time difference, I would get to cover US news. So whenever there was a State of the Union address or any of these kind of major events, I would get to cover it. And so consequently, I started out really taking a great interest in the US. And I have family here, and I even have a distant relative who I never met who was killed in 9/11 in one of the towers, whose name appears on the memorial. And so I do feel a great connection with the US. And I've always felt, I used to be told off for talking to strangers in shops and to people working in stores in London. They're like, why do you do that? Because no one talks to anybody in London, And then when I came here, it's I've always been American. It's I've always had that ability to kind of chat to strangers. So I feel, I feel like I'm in the right place finally.
Yeah, you feel like you're home. And we feel like you're home. So we are now at, and Karen and I did some coverage this morning for Meidas Media Network of the seventh session, the seventh day of the Jan6 hearings. And I mean, I thought Cassidy Hutchinson was blow the dome off of the Capitol testimony, but today was just, it was like a cornucopia of amazing facts that this committee has developed. And the way they're doing it is so important to the continuation of our democracy and to the reinstallation of the guardrails around our democracy. And was severely pressure tested by Donald Trump. And some people are saying, and some of the trolls that all of us get on Twitter are saying, who cares? You're trying to distract from Biden and his presidency. No, we're not. We're talking about a historic, epic conspiracy and seditious conspiracy led for the first time in U.S. history by the U.S. president to retain power. And of course, Congress and the special committee has a role in bringing that to light, just like the Watergate committee did and all the other committees have in the past. What happens from here, I want to talk about as well, in terms of, has the weather changed because of the Cassidy Hutchinson, because of the 7 sessions, as to the likelihood of the prosecution of Donald Trump? At the beginning, I thought it was going to be for the crimes outlined by Liz Cheney, the 7 steps of the conspiracy. The more I listen and the more I understand, I think that the clearest path to a successful prosecution against Donald Trump maybe what happened on the ellipse in the days prior to it, starting on the tweet on December the 19th, and knowing that there was an armed insurrection in front of him, and actually creating it and then sending it off to do whatever they were going to do with members of Congress. So let me start with Anthony. What has been your takeaway from both the theater of it and the substance of it, with 7 sessions under our belt with the Jan6 committee?
Well, my first feeling is, how did it come to this? Like, why do we need to get to a point where there would need to be public hearings or any hearing or any investigation? Because the system should have prevented all of this with the first impeachment, right? When he did the perfect phone call with Zelensky, and he got impeached by Congress, and then it goes to the Senate. Of course, they let him go because he's the supreme leader. That's the point at which this entire party should have ended. And we should never have got to a point where this kind of partisan nature of American politics, it's like we are prepared to literally sell anything, sell our souls, sell our grandmothers, just to kind of maintain power. And it's a tragedy because, democracy it's fragile. And I just don't think America needed to, until this point, consider that its democracy could actually be taken away by a solitary individual. I mean, this is the thing. It really is down to one man. And if Donald Trump was a different kind of person, if he had a moral compass or a conscience, if he wasn't mentally ill, and I need to be careful about saying how mentally ill he is, because I don't want to use that in his defense. You know what I mean? Because
he won't. Don't worry.
Right, he won't. But plenty of clinicians have diagnosed him from afar. And that is that he is the last person on the planet that should ever have been the president. And so that's why we've got this whole thing now. And it's rubbing off in other countries as well. His tenure and his behavior and the laws that have been, even abortion, this has all come about because of Donald Trump being this empty vessel where all these other lawmakers have been able to manipulate him to do what it is that they want. Whether it be the Federalist Society, coming in and choosing individuals for the Supreme Court. There's all these theories about what's really gone on behind this. So I see Trump as being the pinnacle, or the nucleus of this disaster. But I also recognize that it takes an army of others to kind of facilitate all of this damage. And so the first impeachment is when he should have gone. The second impeachment, of course, was for the insurrection. And they let him off on that one. So that's how I feel from a distance. It's like, where is the moral compass of the people who are elected representatives of the voters and the citizens of this country? Well,
look at your home country. 2 cabinet members resign, and it brings down the entire government. And there goes Boris Johnson. And by contrast, as you've so eloquently outlined, look what it came to. And we still have a large percentage of Americans that think Trump did nothing wrong, but properly, in a First Amendment way, advocate his position. I mean, they've completely tuned this out. I want to talk about what do we think the ultimate impact. There's a historical audience. There's a real-time voter audience. There's a DOJ audience. There's many, many reasons. And accountability. You just have to do this as a civilized democracy. You have to put your leaders on trial when they do bad things. Kara, what do you think? I know you had an opinion in the very, very beginning, because you and I have been doing this for a while, about the show around the presentation. And that, would they at the end, in the way they elected, to take advantage of the fact that the Republicans took what I refer to as took the practice ball home and went home. It took the practice ball and went home. And they thought, well, maybe that would scuttle the hearings. Instead, all it did was give them a free pass to present not the way Watergate was presented, not gavel to gavel with all live testimony and a Q&A back and forth, but in a presentation of evidence in a way that you and I and other lawyers would make an opening or a closing argument from the very beginning. How effective do you think that's been? And for you, what has been the most powerful moments in the 7 sessions?
Yeah, so, I had my doubts. in the beginning because this was scripted and it felt very produced. And so I was concerned it would lack a little bit of authenticity. And I have to say, each one is better than the next. I think they are really doing a painstaking, methodical, excellent job at going through detail by detail and presenting it in a way that people can understand. And there's many ways you could slice and dice this. You could go in chronological order. You could, take a day by day. But instead, they're doing it slightly differently. They're focusing on, things that kind of make sense to go together, like Trump's pressuring the states was one day, or Trump's pressuring DOJ was another day, or pressuring Pence. They're grouping things in ways that I think has been extremely effective. And look, they've spoken to over 1,000 people, and so to be able to take all that testimony, one of the things I love is when they show the videos and they show these 26-year-old staffers just asking questions of witnesses. I mean, they're really doing a phenomenal job of learning the facts, getting the information, and then digesting it and presenting it in a way that tells a story. And so I do think they're doing a really effective job at telling a story that feels authentic, and it also feels really important from just a history, kind of historical standpoint. We all sort of watched TV on January 6th, and we all kind of knew what happened, but I don't think anyone appreciated just the coordinated effort of all the different things that go together that they've been presenting. My concerns are I have a couple concerns. Number one, I don't know how many people are actually really watching it. It's a huge time investment to watch it at the there's these many hours, and it's in the middle of the day, right? And so, and there's been 7 hearings, and so it's been over 20 plus hours of these summary, they're sort of these summary hearings. So I worry a little bit that it's the choir, they're preaching to the choir a little bit. And
we know one person is watching.
Well, exactly, we do.
Donald
we know one
Trump
person
is watching.
Exactly, because they're clearly getting under his skin. Yeah. And my hope is that the DOJ is watching, because I think really what they're doing is they're creating a roadmap for the investigators, for the Department of Justice. I mean, this is a massive case. When you think about it, they've interviewed over 1,000 people themselves. And so for that could take years and years and years and years for any prosecution, to go through that kind of level of investigation. And it's not like they're not busy bringing their 800 cases, of seditious conspiracy and all the other things that they're bringing as well. So, they're quite busy already on this. So this is kind of a beautiful roadmap that they've presented to the prosecution to say, these are the people you need to speak with. This is the evidence you need to get. This is the non-hearsay evidence you're going to want to get. And this is the evidence that supports these charges. And so I think that is my biggest takeaway, is that they're really going to kind of do that work for the Justice Department, but I was disappointed to hear, for example, that the Justice Department hasn't interviewed most of these witnesses, and it makes me a little frustrated. Like, what are they doing? I hope they're going to continue. I hope they're going to start really moving forward quickly here, because I think the evidence is there. I mean, sure, it has to stand up on cross-examination, and sure, it has to be non-hearsay, it has to be admissible, it has to be relevant, all those things. But I think they've done an excellent job at really kind of showing these are the places these are the threads you're going to want to pull, and this is where you're going to want to look. And I think they're going to, look, there's never going to be a perfect case. There's never going to be 100% proof, direct evidence that, you're not going to find an email where Donald Trump wrote to Mark Meadows or somebody else saying, I know that I lost this election, but let's just say it this way anyway. It's never going to be the case. They're not going to have the direct evidence. So but prosecutors do this all the time. And there's no reason, just because he's the former president of the United States, that they have to be afraid to bring a tough case, because I think you've got all the elements here. And that's the thing that I think these hearings have done an excellent job at showing.
What was, before I turn to Anthony, what was the most, if you can put your finger on one, what has been the most powerful person or bit of evidence that you've heard so far in the 7 hearings?
I thought that's a great question. I don't have a particular moment or a particular piece. I thought Cassidy Hutchinson was, that turned a corner, I think. Yeah. But I also think the fact that they're putting all these Republicans, and almost every person who testifies, if not everybody, is a Republican. I think it's just really, I think that's a really effective, that in and of itself has been effective. I think I really love the questioning that's been happening. I was a little worried at first because they don't just ask questions, they kind of give testimony too, in a way, right? They give speeches, the various, whether it's Liz Cheney or whoever, they give a lot of speeches. And at first I was like, I didn't know how effective that would be. And I find those summary speeches quite effective. Mm-hmm. I don't know. To me, for whatever reason, Liz Cheney is the person that comes to mind as the person who I think has really coming out as the most effective person in this. I know a lot of people love Jamie Raskin. I mean, there's different people who like different people, and I know these aren't even the witnesses, but to me, just her perspective in all of this and the things she's doing, and she makes sure that like even today, she made sure that we all know that Donald Trump is intimidating a witness that you haven't heard from, and we referred this to the DOJ because we will go to any lengths to protect these hearings. And she's just something about her that I just have to say, she is really impressing me in these hearings. She is making sure that, there's no bullshit with her on these hearings. And so there's something about that I find really powerful.
Yeah. Let me turn to Anthony. So Anthony, you've seen it in real time or the summaries.
I've been watching them in real time. I've been choosing to watch the Fox News coverage.
Yeah, good.
And the reason for that is for obvious reasons. I want to see how they're dissecting it and translating it. They have a lawyer on, Jonathan Turley. I watched him, and he's running out of excuses for these.
He taught me con law for my bar review course.
Yeah. Well, he's obviously a partisan guy. He's the chair of public interest law at George Washington University. And I think that, they get these people on who have these titles or they have these positions, and it gives them credence. But at the end of the day, they're just Republican hacks.
Right.
And so
he's always been. Yeah, he's always been.
They're using language is legal speak that will confuse the viewers in a way to make it sound like the hearing doesn't really have a case. But they're kind of, it's become indefensible now, and that's really what I thought was most interesting about this week's testimony. And I really feel like the chronology of this is really important. And Meidas put a video out a few months ago called A Coup in Plain Sight. It was a 5-minute edited video, which was one of the best videos I think Meidas have made, because it basically told us the story, with a voiceover of what was going on the evening of the 5th and the morning of the 6th. And we could have not had the hearing, and they could have just used the MeidasTouch video as evidence, because it was certainly more digestible. It's 5 minutes, and sometimes that's all people have time for. But what it did was it told the story in this kind of chronological way, and I think that's the best thing about this hearing. In terms of star witnesses, I also was drawn to Cassidy Hutchinson in so many ways, but I also am fascinated in the way that Donald Trump has kind of tried to brush off, I don't know her. I don't even know who she was. She's nothing to do with me. I never met this woman. Then
she's unstable. She's unstable. She's unstable based on her handwriting.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's
have
that photo.
Have you seen his signature, by the way? Speaking of handwriting,
that's a whole story.
He looks like a serial killer.
Before Anthony gives it, I want to hear his complete thought. There's a line that I heard from a Republican that fits in well with what Anthony said at the top of the show. This Republican who didn't want to be named, said, "I'm not saying that Trump should be committed to a mental hospital. I'm just saying if he was in a mental hospital, he wouldn't be able to get out."
Right. I mean, but this is what we're dealing with.
So true.
And the more that they present, the more evidence that they present, it's clear that all of our worst fears about who this guy was are true. And that he really, he's a very miserable man. He's a disgusting human being who is a very miserable person who is, he's only ever sued people if he doesn't like them. He can't communicate. He just kind of throws lawyers at it. And this is really the first time in his life that he's having to be accountable. And these messages he's been putting out on Truth Social, which I've seen because people repost them on Twitter, which they probably shouldn't do, are proof that he is now running scared and he is genuinely terrified. But I'm also interested in how he doesn't realize that the game is up. He's still peddling the game, the grift. And that's really the big issue here, is that even if you did get him on the stand and you asked him all these questions, he'd be like, and it's like, oh man, I mean, he is going to be the last man standing. And I just worry that nothing will come of this. I honestly believe that. Let's
talk about, and I agree with you. Let's talk about the multiple audiences for this. One, I think we all agree, at least on this podcast and on the Midas Media, you have to do this. Any civilized democracy, constitutional republic has to hold its people accountable. And the Jan6 committee is doing just that. And history will look fondly back on the work that's been done by this committee and by the witnesses and even the Republicans who, although at the time joked about being on Team Crazy or Team Normal rather than invoking the 25th Amendment, walking away and not enabling him, at least now, even if it's Pat Cipollone 3 days ago, even now are coming forward, maybe not courageously, but they are coming forward. I like Eric Hirschman a lot. I think his New York, Brooklynese style of speaking about what he said to people like John Eastman, to Jeffrey Clark, to Sidney Powell has been, for me, has been one of my favorite. Whenever I hear Eric Hirschman's about to give some video clip, I'm on the edge of my seat because he just tells it like it is. He basically said, "You're all fucking crazy." And I don't want, my favorite line for him was when he said to John Eastman, "I don't want to hear anything out of your mouth except the words peaceful transition. Repeat it after me. Peaceful." And he made him say it. And the guy actually said it. And he was in the room, sort of like Zelig. He and Cipollone were in the room for many of these things. The night before the "come to DC, it's going to be wild" tweet goes out, that crazy meeting, the craziest meeting in the entire Trump presidency that Jimmy Raskin talked about. They're there. Meadows is there for most of it. Cassidy Hutchinson is present for most of this. Cipollone was present for most of the major events that matter that we keep talking about. And so his testimony was powerful. But today, to be able to get Proud Boys and Oath Keepers to turn, even when some of them are risking jeopardy because they're still being prosecuted or haven't been sentenced yet, and they came in and said, we were had by Trump. To your point about what is anything going to come of this? Okay. People who are watching or not watching, who are going to vote or not vote for Republicans or Trump, have already made up their mind. If you're a thinking adult, you have to be persuaded by the evidence because it's just, as you said, it's just inexorable. The amount of evidence here, you just can't explain it away. I was heartened, polling you always have to take with a grain of salt. I was heartened by a couple of things. The New York Times, at least, is reporting, or there was a poll that was done, I think a Monmouth poll, just recently that said basically Trump has lost the under 35 vote for the Republicans. 65% of those under 35 do not want to see him run again. They may not have a position they want to take on Jan 6, but they don't want to see him run again. And that is a tremendous number to have walked away from Trump, as you're saying, he's trying to be the last man standing, and they're all leaving the party, leaving him alone. The second thing is Lisa Monaco. I mean, people, sources close to the Department of Justice have said that Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony has opened a lot of eyes at the Department of Justice. I can't believe it took this long for them to see clearly a crime that may be easier to prosecute than any of this other conspiracy and spoke and wheel and hub and Trump always finds a way just to be outside of the communication related to it, as much as we're piecing this together
because he's clever. He's a
very
career
clever.
criminal, right? So he knows how not to leave a paper trail, whether it's tearing them up or putting down the toilet or eating them. The guy knows how to avoid leaving evidence.
So you're left with what I think Karen was commenting on. You're left with the Jan6 committee getting to the water's edge, connecting, Bannon, Flynn, Stone, Giuliani, Powell, Eastman, Clark, usually through Meadows on all of these things, if not through Bannon, through Stone, through those, and Giuliani we've talked about. So you have all that. But what you don't have is the thing that Karen said, is you don't have the text or the tweet that says, at the Willard Hotel, all right, go send the armed masses to go overthrow the Capitol.
I think that might come, though. I actually think that they talk about evidence that they haven't yet presented. If this is as well produced as it is, and it really is well produced, you save the money shot for the end, right? And
episode
and
7, 8, episode 8.
7 before the prequels. And so I honestly feel like there is going to be a moment at which it's like, wow. I mean, look, when he did the phone call with with Brad Raffensperger and said, I just need you to find me one more vote. I mean, that again is proof that the guy was trying to rig the election. Why not that phone call? It's on tape.
Well, let's have Karen talk about that. So we've got parallel to this in real life. We've got Fani Willis's, and it's really heating up, special grand jury in Fulton County, Atlanta, Georgia. We now have a sitting senator, former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who has to go into a grand jury and give a criminal grand jury and give testimony or take the Fifth Amendment. What do you think about that, Karen? And where do you think Fani ends up, or where the special grand jury ends up, and they're recommending an indictment?
Yeah. So, obviously, this would be best prosecuted federally as one package, including the Georgia one. However, the president can pardon a federal conviction. So if he gets convicted federally, if you get another Republican president, he could always get pardoned. So there is something beautiful about getting a state prosecution as well. And that to me is the clearest, most simple, you've got the call on tape. So, it's really just, pretty clear kind of what he did and what he was trying to do, but you need to show his intent because, a lot of these crimes, and everyone kind of talks about the various, you have to show that he knew that it was false or that he knew it was a lie. And that's why they're sort of taking all this time to show that he did know. And, even the Georgia case, if let's say he really did think that there were some missing votes. And so he was saying, find the votes that are legitimate. That's why they still have to prove that he knew that it was false and that he was trying to interfere and that he had a corrupt mind, that he had a nefarious purpose for his intent.
He threatened him, didn't he? He also threatened him. He said it was like, no one's going to like you if you don't.
Yeah. So I think there's enough to bring the case. I mean, the thing that really made me sad today was, these poor guys who, one of them, Mr. Ayers, I think was his name, was, he's being prosecuted. He was like, he's not an oath keeper or any of these other things. He just hears his president that he follows who says, come on January 6th. He gets a ride the next day. He goes, and then he's listening and he says, come to the Capitol. His president tells him to go to the Capitol. So he goes to the Capitol and he's convicted. He is being prosecuted. And I'm like, to me, that was sort of outrageous that, the real guy who's doing this, I don't understand why everyone's walking away from him, and so I think Fani Willis has a great case that she can bring. Is it perfect? No. But as I said, there is no perfect case, and prosecutors do that all the time. They bring cases that aren't perfect but it's a pretty great case. And there's a lot of really good evidence.
I think Fani has less baggage in making her prosecutor discretion decision than Merrick Garland has. Merrick Garland, appointed by a Democratic president, has the weight of history on his shoulders about being the first attorney general to prosecute a former president for a crime. and that will go down in the annals of history. It should. I don't want to set up the punchline by anybody taking away from my question. I don't think he should. He should. But it is a different set. It's a different matrix that he has to go through. And not that Biden's involved with that decision, but that Garland has to go through in his cabinet. Fani Willis, she's a free agent. She's in a state where a crime probably was an election crime was probably committed not just by Trump, but by a combination of Trump, Meadows, Lindsey Graham, and others who were all involved in that pressuring. I mean, Raffensperger and his CEO, who testified powerfully in front of this committee 3 or 4 sessions ago. I think that the takeaway on that was tremendous. So go Fani, because I think, as you said, it's going to take Garland a long time in his DOJ to reproduce and replicate the evidence that's been. Now, let me clear up something. Let me ask you, Karen, something, and Anthony too. I don't think they have to re-interview these people. If these files are turned over to them, you know what these witnesses are going to say. You may have asked another question, or you might have gone down another line of inquiry, but you've got hours upon hours for every one of these 1,000 people that's going to be delivered to you with a ribbon by the Jan6 committee when this is all done. Why can't they just, maybe there's a couple more they'd like to talk to, but why can't they just take that and move forward with their decision to indict?
I mean, there's, you would never do that. You want to interview witnesses yourself. You want to test them yourself. You want to test their credibility yourself. You want to cross-examine them. And, also it's you got to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. And so every prosecutor, maybe they don't have to interview all 1,000 people because there are people who are not relevant, but certainly the people who they've determined are the pieces of the puzzle towards prosecution. They'll use this testimony to sort of decide and create that roadmap and decide who to talk to and what and how to approach them, and whether it's through subpoena or some other way. Perhaps you compel testimony and you immunize certain people, and so they'll use the information that was gleaned from these interviews to make those decisions. But they're going to want to interview they're going to want to interview and test the witnesses themselves when they do this investigation, and see if it holds up, and that this is actually direct evidence that's admissible. Just one thing I wanted to mention and get your thoughts on was, in the beginning, in the first few hearings, the charges that people were mostly talking about were these conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding. And that's where you had to prove this sort of he knew and his intent. But the more that we get into his the later hearings, the more I think that seditious conspiracy and incitement to insurrection is on the table. And there, even if he thought he won, even if he thought the election was, somehow he won, you can't point an angry mob locked and loaded that you summon, that are armed, that are violent, that they're chanting Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence, and you're saying he deserves it. You can't. That's like pointing a weapon and shooting that weapon at the Capitol. You're not allowed to do that.
We always thought that. You've used that phrase before. Now we have the actual evidence that he was told that they were armed and dangerous, did nothing to disarm them. In fact, wanted them armed and dangerous in attending the rally. And knowing that, which is how you've described it, pointed it in the direction. That's a crime. I agree with you. That is where I think Lisa Monaco and the Department of Justice, based on Cassidy Hutchinson, is now focused, at least based on the reporting that's out there.
The funny thing is, what they might do, depending on what the evidence is from today, they could just get him on witness intimidation. Like they might just pick an easy, small thing.
That's what they would end up doing.
Well, let me hear that. Let me hear from Anthony on that.
Isn't that what happened with Nixon? Fundamentally, it's like, you don't go for the crime itself. It's trying to cover up the crime. And I feel like,
that's right.
All of this, just hearing you as lawyers go, is that a crime? And how do they prove that's a crime? It's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is like a gazillion crimes here.
You're right.
And maybe it would be easier to prove what's not a crime. And I kind of feel like we've this is maybe my perspective coming from Europe, where, you know, we have this European Court of Human Rights, and it's all about, you know, doing the right thing. You know, doing the right thing is like baked into our unwritten constitution. You know, a lot of people don't understand how Britain has a constitution, but it's unwritten. And people are like, well, how do you make that work? It's like, it just does. And it's because our country is so old, and it has evolved. And, you know, as a country evolves, its laws and a feeling about living in that country and how you behave is baked into the very fabric of the culture. And America is a very young country, and it doesn't have that. So it relies on case law, and it relies on these kind of, you know, these moments to kind of rewrite history, I guess. And so I understand why the committee is doing this. They want to bake this into the history books, right? They want to put this on record. But for me, as someone with a moral compass, I just cannot see how we're having to do all of this stuff and bring in all of these witnesses and make all these people have to regurgitate. I mean, Michael Falone, I think his name was, who's the hipster policeman. I think he gave the most incredible testimony. He was like on the first edition. Because, you know, he voted for Donald Trump. He was a guy who, you know, he looked like a Trump supporter. You know, he had his beard and his tattoos, and he was like ready for Trump. And then he sees the light once he realizes what's going on. And then he gets tasered with his own weapon and ends up suffering major injuries and trauma and gives the most compelling testimony. These are the people, you know, for me, that's where it could have stopped. I didn't need to hear from White House insiders. Just hearing from him was enough for me. And I think I've said this before, but it's like, to me, there are two crimes here. There is the distraction, which is the riot. That was distracting from what was going on with the state legislators and with, you know, getting Mike Pence to kind of do his bit, which he didn't do. And he's hailed as a hero when all he did was his job, you know. And so I feel like mixing both of them in, because I don't think most people know what an insurrection really is. It's not a word that you would use in the kind of common vernacular. And consequently, I see the insurrection as that kind of overturning of the election, which was Trump and it was Bannon and it was all of those people involved, the guy who ran Overstock, you know, like this, all this kind of, you know, Michael Flynn.
Overstock guy.
But then you've got this misdirection, you've got this riot, you know, like it's classic criminality. Create a distraction over here while we do the serious business over here. Yeah. And so I see it as two very different things, and I feel like throwing it all into one kind of, as Karen was saying, it's like you're blaming these rioters who are just doing what they're told for the bigger business, which is the fact that Trump's trying to overturn the election.
I see it a little bit differently, but not much. I think we'll end up in the same place.
Yeah,
I am buying in, and I think Liz Cheney did a good job in the very first session and giving the architecture for how they were going to present. I do see the increasing, if you were to chart this, the increasing frustration of Trump in trying all of these strategies and none of them working. You know, let's try the lawsuits, and you go 0-63. Let's try, you know, surrounded by these crazy lawyers who no one's ever heard of, and most of them are now disbarred or soon to be disbarred. That doesn't work. Let's pressure the state electors and the legislators there. We've got some people that like us in there. Let's make presentations there through the same people, through Giuliani, through Powell, Lin Wood. We don't talk about him anymore. And that fails because, you know, they have a backbone and they have a moral compass, as you like to say, Anthony. That doesn't work. And then let's pressure the Department of Justice. And let's, you know, in the last hours and gasp of the presidency, let's replace the acting attorney general with the guy 5 floors below, who's an environmental lawyer,
guy. Yeah.
The environmental guy who Pat Cipollone said, what do you do?
Yeah.
Go back to doing that, not this.
And then they were going to make crazy Sidney Powell some special counsel. Whatever. I mean,
and so all this is failing, and where he's running out of time. Eventually, he's going to be the ex-president, and he's clinging to that power. And the last thing between December the 18th, the Willard Hotel battle stations with the two groups of crazies there, you know, Stone and Flynn in General Flynn in one room,
well.
and Giuliani and Bannon and the others in the other room, with Meadows sort of at the top as the point guard, coordinating all those things. That's not working. And so he wants to use, this is it, man. It is now, just flame-throwing, carpet bombing the Capitol in a literally last-ditch effort to use pitchforks and torches to overturn the democracy. So I didn't see it as two different events. I just saw it as the desperate act of a man whose power, by dint of the clock, was going to expire any moment. And this was the last thing. Bonfire. Boom. And
it was him finding out that Pence wasn't going to play his game.
Absolutely.
And so that's when he rewrote the speech to kind of incite this violence, because it was up, as you say, it was like the 11th hour. And, he didn't care for these people. He didn't care that they were armed. He didn't care that people were going to die.
I got bad news for these people. And then I want to talk about the 187 minutes that Karen's talked about in prior podcasts, because I think that Lord knows what was going on for those 187 minutes. But I have enough elbow interaction with Trump, having grown up in this area in New York, having known about the Trump organization from the very beginning. He's probably the only person in America that lost money running a casino, and his families. He would not allow, I hate to burst their bubble, the people that are his supporters, he wouldn't have allowed to shine his shoes or open his limousine door at any point in his career. He's a silver spoon kid who's been living off of daddy's money. He took daddy's $100 million and made it into $50 million. And then, which is hard to do, and then inflated his own ego and his licensing and all of that. He's never built a darn thing except for one that he built with daddy's money and connections, the Hyatt in New York. Everything else
was the elite, isn't he? He is the elite that he claimed in his campaign.
He was a middling
wannabe elite.
He was a middling real estate developer of no real account that you would not put in the top. Every year there's a huge real estate conference, REMBY in New York. He would barely be in that room because he wasn't really a developer. If it wasn't for The Apprentice keeping him as some sort of pseudo celebrity, the way the Kardashians are, the way the Hilton sisters are, he wouldn't even have been president of the United States. So these people that have transformed their blue collar, right wing, primarily not college educated, because that's his largest supporter, 50-year-old white guy, he would never have let that person within 10 feet of him at any other point in his career except for when he ran for president.
I think we're going to find more out about that, because I think eventually if he ever did take the stand, I mean, I want to see him in Guantanamo Bay, but I mean, if he ever did take the stand and he was asked questions about his base and his supporters, I think he might accidentally start insulting them. And because often that's what these people do, they just it all spews out. And he will literally throw anybody to the lions. And all of these people that have been, because this is just a fundraising thing, isn't it? This whole movement is to make money. He's making money now. He's selling merchandise. Kimberly's now selling stuff online. She's got this new alternative to Zoom that she's set up, that the family are now, they've come up with. It's called Meet With Me or something. And I'm like, they are just gouging these poor people that don't have any money. I mean, I wouldn't mind, but these people that they're stealing from are not rich.
He's going to grift $100 million a year for the foreseeable future, unless he's in, like you said, unless he's in Leavenworth or in Guantanamo Bay. Karen, what were you going to say when we interrupted?
No, I just that my only concern is, there's this whole, it's not only an American problem, this right-wing white supremacy kind of nationalist movement that you see in Europe, you see in America. There's an underlying issue that is still, even if you prosecute Trump, is still an issue that just, has to be dealt with and addressed, because, it's scary. I mean, it's amazing when you heard today, one of the gentlemen who testified saying that what caused him to leave was the fact that they were denying the Holocaust. And that was even too much for him. And you just think back to how did the Holocaust happen, and how did, and where were, like, how did anyone let that happen, and it's because there were so many people that were the fuel to the fire of the one person who did all the bad things. And that's sort of where we are, or where we're headed with Donald Trump.
But Florida is going to teach both sides of the Holocaust.
Well, yeah, but no, but speaking of Florida, you prosecute Trump, you've got Ron DeSantis could be, all I'm saying is this partly what's scary about this hearing is not just Donald Trump. It's a whole aspect of a certain type of belief system in America that's a little scary, here.
Yeah, but it's always, unfortunately, pre-social media historically has always been there. 20% of America, I'm just using, this is my own Popokian prediction, Popokian statistic. 20% of America has always had off-kilter views. It's just that they haven't been amplified and personified in a president, like in Donald Trump. But we saw the beginnings.
But they control the Supreme Court too now.
Right. But we saw the beginnings of this with even before the Tea Party movement. You go back to Lee Atwater and what they did, because the Republican Party generally is a narrow-based party, and they can't win unless they make abortion, gay marriage, gays in the military, wedge issues front and center. They can't win otherwise, But look, I'm not. You have to know your history. Your history is prologue. I've seen the videos of the American Nazi Party holding a rally in Madison Square Garden in the 1940s. It's not that long ago, and there is a group out there, whether they're QAnon, whether they're John Birch, whether they're anything the Southern Poverty Unit is following, is there, and they all kind of coalesced behind this president, and the Republicans went along with it in this unholy alliance in order, as Anthony said, to get power in a naked fashion, and.
Because they don't have the votes, do they? And
they never have the votes.
If you don't have the votes, because if you poll America is quite a progressive country, right, full of progressive people, and people don't want abortion banned, and people don't, and so when you've got this kind of minority rule, which is both in the Supreme Court but also in the Republican Party, that is a recipe for the civil war that I've been talking about. And I can't imagine what the alternative is, because we look at this hearing as being something that is the right thing to do at the right time and the right people are in charge. But if you watch Fox News or Newsmax or any of these other networks and see how it's being portrayed, it's a bipartisan hearing. And yet even the left-leaning media is not reporting it as bipartisan when it is, because they're denying these two Republicans and calling them rhinos. But you can call them rhinos all you like, they're still Republicans. And so I think we are in danger. The media supports this. The media is a right-leaning, conservative-leaning, even CNN and all of these networks. They need the fight. It's all about money. It comes down to money. Yeah. And so they'll say anything to facilitate their business.
Well, on your point, I was just talking to a friend of mine who is a moderate Republican about all of a sudden, spontaneously in the last week, is story after story, including in the mainstream media, about Biden being too old for the position. Yeah. It started with Fox and Newsmax and Tucker Carlson. Now it's the New York Times,
right?
And now it's they've all been co-opted, or because, like you said, they're all about the ratings. They're all about if it bleeds, it leads. So let's take out Biden. It's either that, or there's Democrats that are fearful that we're going to lose big time, not just the midterms, but beyond, and want to see him be a Lyndon Johnson and not run for a second term.
But there is a price to this, isn't there? There's a cost to hate speech. And saying Biden's, old and he's senile and all this stuff, there is a price. It affects people. And I fear that, we're seeing mass shootings, and we'll see an increasing number of mass shootings, because it's almost like these far right, or even just even right of center, they've still got weapons locked up at home. There's 7 million AR-15 style rifles in circulation. I really fear that all of this misinformation on all channels, and I hate watching CNN because it's too over dramatized for a European like me, where it's like, the news should be just the facts, and it isn't. It's like, this is going to happen and we're all going to die, and I'm like, and so I genuinely think that America has become its own worst enemy, and
I agree.
It's got this kind of American exceptionalism which says, yes, we're mass shooting, and yes, our education is terrible, and yes, we've got no healthcare system, but we are the greatest country in the world. And that repeating this rhetoric of being the greatest country in the world does not serve us in any way. I mean, America is 15th in terms of economic stability out of the top 40 countries, right? It's 27th in global social mobility. It's 21st out of 40 countries in social inequality within the economic system. It's 45th in the world in terms of press freedom. It's like, I mean, I have numbers in my head. It's 24th in reading. It's 39th in math. It's 24th in science. I mean, America is really on its knees in so many ways.
Maybe number one in podcasts.
Well, no, it's number one in incarcerations. I mean,
Well,
it is number one in something.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy. So I think, like, in terms of just stopping, resetting, nothing is going to change, because Karen's right. Everything goes back to racism. It goes back to slave owners and landowners and the Wild West. And I just fear that the people that are watching this hearing, who are on the right, whether they're on the far right or they just see this as being like Democrat stuff, in the same way they see climate change as being Democrat stuff, whilst the city is burning around them.
Yeah. Yeah, I learned something today. I want Anthony Davis on the show more often. I like unshackled Anthony, not the nonpartisan 5-minute news guy. I like the guy with opinions and can spout out statistics and stats.
I was going to say those being able to rattle statistics like that's a talent. That's a skill set.
He's a polymath.
Well, you know something, that my favorite statistic out of all of those was the UN Development Programme's Human Development Index. They said America was 17th in the world for quality of life. And I think that quality of life is actually a really good metric with which to measure ourselves. Now, I moved from England because I knew that here in the US, I would have a better quality of life. But I chose to live in California, which is in itself a bubble, and the sun shines all the time and people are kind of fake nice to each other. And I would rather someone was fake nice than really nasty. So, my perspective is one of quality of life. And I just cannot see how any of Trump's supporters, their quality of life is no better now than it was before he got elected.
No. Yep. Karen, final word. You love those.
By the way, the final words. By the way, before I say a final word, do you know a fun fact? Here we've got Anthony talking about all these incredible statistics and looking really impressive, and I'm about to give a fun fact. Do you know what Roger Stone's tattoo is?
Oh, God. No.
I've seen it in that documentary about Roger Stone, and I can't remember who it is, but it's disgusting.
He's got the face of Richard Nixon.
That's right.
It's tattooed to his back.
But it's his whole back, and he's got like big because he's a bodybuilder. So he's got these weird elderly muscular shoulders with Nixon's face on it.
My final thought is, first of all, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really fun. I hope we can do this again. And I think your perspective is an important one that people need to hear more often. I mean, we live in this bubble that's the United States. And, we think that we're the center of the world, and Hollywood perpetuates that, and the media perpetuates that, and everything else. And, just having a perspective of countries that are much older than we are, and who've been through it all and who've seen it all, and who can sometimes be more civilized, but sometimes not. We could learn a lot from those perspectives. So the fact that you get up every day and you take the time to share those perspectives that are different and but really important and really, really much needed is just very appreciated. And I appreciate you very much. And I really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Oh,
Thank you.
so well.
I would just say finally, I love America as much as I love the UK. And I think to critique your own country or the country that you've, relocated to is because you love it. It's not because you hate it. It's not because you're trying to bring it down.
And you moved what, a month after Donald Trump
Yeah.
You moved, you don't even know the really good America, Obama America, that was a dream, you love it.
But it was a dream for you, maybe, and people like you, but for maybe a third or maybe more than a third, it was the worst, to have this black guy in the White House just was they could not comprehend. And that's what I've had to learn, because I too thought it was, Obama was just was Elysium. And actually, for many, many people, we really need to get under their skin. Why did they find that so offensive? And these are the lessons that I think we need to learn here.
Yeah, and we're going to have you back to do that. We've reached the end of the midweek edition of Legal AF with Michael Popok and Karen Friedman Agnifilo, and our special guest and our brother in podcasting, Anthony Davis, 5 Minute News and The Weekend Show. You can catch it all on the Meidas Media Network. Thanks again.